You know that feeling when you check your savings account and there's like $8,247 sitting there? And you've been working for years. Maybe you've got a decent job, you're not exactly struggling, but that number just sits there. It grows so slowly that sometimes you wonder if you're doing something fundamentally wrong. You see those Reddit posts about 25-year-olds with $200,000 in their brokerage accounts, and you think, what am I missing? Am I stupid? Did I sleep through some crucial life lesson? And here's the weird part. You probably make okay money. You're not irresponsible. You don't buy a new car every year or blow your paycheck on designer clothes. You're just living, paying rent, buying groceries, going out occasionally because, you're a human being who exists in the world. And yet that first $100,000 feels like trying to push a boulder uphill in the rain while wearing socks instead of shoes. My name is Oliver, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, financial psychology, and why some people seem to effortlessly build wealth while others stay stuck in the same financial patterns for decades. And what I've discovered is that the journey from zero to $100,000 is fundamentally structurally different from the journey from $100,000 to $500,000 in ways that most people don't realize until they're already wealthy. This isn't one of those motivational finance videos where I'm going to tell you to stop buying coffee or wake up at 4 a.m. or whatever. This is about understanding why the system itself is designed to make that first milestone brutally difficult, and why, if you can just get over that initial hurdle, the path gets dramatically easier. Because once you understand the actual mechanics of wealth building, once you see the invisible forces at play, you can stop beating yourself up for not being further along and start making decisions that actually align with how money really works. And honestly, that shift in perspective might be the most valuable thing you gain from the next 15 minutes. So let's talk about why $100,000 feels impossible. And I mean really talk about it, because there's this pervasive cultural narrative that if you're struggling to save, you're just not disciplined enough. You're not sacrificing enough. You're not hustling hard enough. But that's not really what's happening. When you're starting from zero or close to zero, you're not actually starting from a neutral position. You're starting from a deficit. Think about it. Most people in their 20s or early 30s are carrying student loans, maybe some credit card debt from when they were figuring out how to adult, possibly a car payment. You're paying interest on money you borrowed to become the person who could earn money. It's this weird circular trap where your past self took money from your future self, and now you're the future self going, "Thanks a lot, past me." I have a friend, let's call him Marcus, who graduated with $60,000 in student loans. Decent job, makes about $75,000 a year in a mid-sized city. After taxes, that's roughly $55,000 take home. His loan payment is $650 a month. Rent is $1,400. Car payment, because he needed reliable transportation for work, is $380. Insurance, phone, utilities, groceries, gas, before he even thinks about saving or investing or, enjoying his life in any capacity, he's got maybe $800 left each month. And here's where the math gets brutal. If Marcus saves $500 of that remaining $800 every single month, never gets sick, never has a car repair, never has any emergency whatsoever, it would take him 16 and a half years to reach $100,000. Except that's not even accounting for inflation, or the fact that rent goes up, or that he might want to, go on a date occasionally, or see his family for the holidays. But wait, you might be thinking, what about investing? What about compound interest? And yes, absolutely, we'll get there. But even if Marcus invests that $500 per month and gets a 7% average annual return, he's looking at about 14 years to hit $100,000. 14 years of perfect consistency, zero major setbacks, flawless discipline. That's the dream scenario. The reality, most people can't maintain that level of perfection. Life happens. The transmission fails, you need dental work, your laptop dies, your company does layoffs and you're job hunting for 3 months. Each of these events isn't just a pause in saving, it's often dead, which means you're going backward. Here's something that drives me slightly crazy about personal finance advice, and honestly, it took me years to articulate why it bothered me so much. Everyone talks about percentages. Save 20% of your income, invest 15% for retirement, keep 6 months of expenses in an emergency fund. And percentages sound fair, right? Equal. If everyone saves 20%, then everyone's making the same sacrifice, the same effort. Except that's absolutely not how it works when you're talking about actual human survival and quality of life. If you make $50,000 a year, saving 20% means living on $40,000. Depending on where you live, that might be extremely tight. That might be roommates, no car, rice and beans, never eating out, no hobbies that cost money. That's sacrifice. If you make $200,000 a year, saving 20% means living on $160,000. That's still a really comfortable life in most places. That's a nice apartment or a house, regular vacations, good food, hobbies, entertainment. The sacrifice is barely noticeable. But here's where it gets really interesting. And this is the thing that makes that first $100,000 so hard. When you're earning less, a larger percentage of your income goes to non-negotiable survival expenses. Rent doesn't scale with your income in a fair way. A studio apartment in a decent area might be $1,200, whether you make $40,000 or $80,000. Groceries cost roughly the same. Your body requires approximately the same amount of food regardless of your salary. So if you make $40,000, your baseline survival might cost $30,000, leaving you $10,000 for everything else, including saving. If you make $80,000, that same baseline might cost $35,000, leaving you $45,000. The person making twice as much has 4.5 times more discretionary money. That's not a typo. The math just works that way because fixed costs don't scale proportionally. And this is before we even talk about the psychological weight of having no buffer. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, every financial decision carries this enormous stress. You can't take risks that might pay off. You can't invest in things that would save money long term. You can't buy the $200 high-quality boots that last 10 years instead of the $50 boots that last 1 year because you don't have $200 right now. Being broke is expensive, which is one of the cruelest ironies of the entire system.
Okay, so everyone knows about compound interest, right? Einstein supposedly called it the eighth wonder of the world, although I'm pretty sure he never actually said that, but whatever, the point stands. Compound interest is magical. Your money makes money, and then that money makes money, and it snowballs into this beautiful wealth-building machine. Except here's what nobody mentions enough. Compound interest doesn't really matter that much when you're starting out. It matters enormously later, but early on, it's basically irrelevant compared to your contributions. Let me show you what I mean. If you invest $100 and it grows at 10% per year, which is aggressive, by the way, you make $10 the first year. $10. Congratulations. Meanwhile, you're trying to save money from your actual paycheck, which is the real heavy lifting. The compound interest in year one is doing almost nothing for you. But fast forward to when you have $100,000 invested, that same 10% return is now $10,000 in 1 year without you doing anything. That's the same as saving $833 per month, except you didn't have to work for it. The money worked for itself. And when you have $500,000, that's $50,000 per year from returns alone. That's more than Marcus makes in a year after taxes, and it's just happening automatically while he sleeps. This is why that first $100,000 is so brutal. You're doing all the work. You're providing 100% of the momentum. You're the engine, the fuel, the driver, everything. But once you hit critical mass, the compound interest becomes a second income stream that you never have to show up for. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's business partner who passed away recently, used to say the first $100,000 is a bitch. And he was right, but maybe not as eloquent as he could have been about why. It's not just about discipline or sacrifice. It's about the mathematical reality that your returns are negligible when your principal is small, so you're building wealth purely through deprivation rather than through your money working for you.
So let's say you're making progress. You get a raise, you get a better job. Your income goes from $50,000 to $70,000. Awesome, right? More money, more saving, faster path to that $100,000. Except that's not usually what happens. What usually happens is lifestyle inflation. You move to a nicer apartment, you buy a more reliable car, you start eating out more because you can finally afford it. You upgrade your wardrobe because you're in a more professional environment. And your savings rate stays exactly the same, or sometimes even goes down. And here's where the discourse around lifestyle inflation gets really annoying to me, because the typical advice is just don't do that. Just keep living like you make $50,000 even though you make $70,000. Easy, right? But that advice ignores something fundamental about human psychology, and honestly, about dignity. When you've been struggling, when you've been stressed about money for years, and you finally get some breathing room, you're not being frivolous by wanting to live a little better. You're being human. You're not weak for wanting a nice dinner occasionally, or an apartment without cockroaches, or a car that doesn't make concerning noises. The problem isn't that lifestyle inflation exists. The problem is that most people let it consume 100% of their raises instead of finding a middle ground. If you get a $20,000 raise, taking home an extra $14,000 or so after taxes, there's a version where you improve your life with $7,000 of that and save the other $7,000. You're living better and saving more. Both things can be true. But what actually happens to most people is the $14,000 just disappears into their lifestyle, and they don't even know where it went, because we're not taught to think about money this way. We're taught that more income means more spending, full stop. The idea of splitting the difference feels almost foreign. And this is one of the key differences between the path to $100,000 and the path to $500,000. People who successfully build wealth past that first milestone have usually figured out this balance. They're not monks living on rice. They're not penny pinching every purchase. They've just learned to let their lifestyle inflate a little bit instead of a lot, and to direct the rest toward assets. Here's something else that makes the first $100,000 harder. You're probably not making very much money yet. I know that sounds obvious, but bear with me because the implications are bigger than you might think. Most people's earning potential follows this arc. You start low, you grow steadily through your 20s and 30s, you peak somewhere in your 40s or 50s, and then it plateaus or declines. But your expenses, those don't follow the same arc. Expenses tend to spike in your 30s and 40s. Kids, bigger housing, aging parents, healthcare costs. So you're trying to save that first $100,000 during the exact years when you make the least money and often have some of the most growth-related expenses. You're buying professional clothes for the first time. You're maybe paying for certifications or additional education to advance your career. You're trying to live in a location that offers career opportunities, which usually means higher cost of living. Meanwhile, people who are on their way from $100,000 to $500,000 are usually in their peak earning years. They've gotten the promotions, they've switched jobs a few times and negotiated higher salaries. They've built expertise that commands premium pay. They're making 50% or 100% or 200% more than they did when they started. And this is where the math gets really interesting because it's not linear. If you make $60,000 a year and save $10,000, that's roughly 17% of your gross income. If you make $120,000 and save $30,000, that's 25% of your gross income, but you're saving 3 times as much in absolute dollars. The time it takes to accumulate wealth compresses dramatically as your income grows, even if your savings rate only increases modestly. I think about my own journey sometimes, and this isn't a humble brag, I promise there's a point to this, but my first job out of college paid $42,000. I saved maybe $3,000 that year, and honestly, that felt like a huge achievement. I was proud of myself. 10 years later, I was making significantly more, and saving $20,000 felt easier than saving $3,000 had felt back then. Not easy exactly, but easier. The math had shifted in my favor. There's this moment that happens on the path to wealth that's really hard to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. It's the moment when you stop feeling broke. Not rich necessarily, but not broke. Your bank account has enough buffer that an unexpected $500 expense is annoying rather than catastrophic. You have a few months of expenses saved. You can see your investments growing. And something shifts psychologically. You start making different decisions, not because you've suddenly become more disciplined or intelligent, but because the stakes feel different. You can afford to think long term because you have a short term buffer. Before this shift, you're in survival mode. You take the job that pays $3,000 more per year, even though it's not really what you want to do, because $3,000 matters desperately. You don't negotiate hard on salary because you can't risk losing the offer. You don't invest in yourself, courses, networking events, better equipment, because you can't spare the money. After this shift, you can take calculated risks. You can turn down the slightly higher paying job if it's a dead-end role and hold out for the better opportunity. You can invest in things that will pay off in 2 years instead of 2 months. You can negotiate aggressively because you have runway if it doesn't work out. This is the hidden advantage of having accumulated some wealth. It's not just the money itself, it's the freedom to make better decisions. Wealth begets wealth not just through compound interest, but through the ability to optimize for long-term value rather than short-term survival. And here's the really frustrating part. This is the exact opposite of how we talk about wealth building. We tell poor people to make long-term decisions, to sacrifice now for future gains, to invest in themselves. But those are rich people strategies. Those are strategies that require a buffer. Telling someone who's living paycheck to paycheck to invest in yourself is like telling someone who's drowning to work on their swimming technique. Technically correct, but missing the more urgent problem. Okay, this is going to sound boring, but stay with me because it actually matters a lot. The tax code is designed to help people who already have money accumulate more money faster. When you're trying to save your first $100,000, you're probably doing it in a pretty inefficient way tax-wise. You're putting money in a savings account, earning 4% interest if you're lucky, and paying taxes on that interest. Or maybe you're contributing to a 401k, which is good, but your employer match is probably modest because you're not making that much. You're getting some tax benefit, but it's limited. Once you have 100,000 or 200,000 or more, you start to have access to better tax strategies. You can max out retirement accounts and still have money left over to invest in a taxable brokerage account where you benefit from lower capital gains rates. You might be able to afford a house, which gives you the mortgage interest deduction and lets you build equity instead of paying rent. You can invest in things like municipal bonds that generate tax-free income. If you're really wealthy, you can do even more sophisticated things. Donor-advised funds, tax loss harvesting, qualified opportunity zones, all these strategies that only make sense if you have substantial assets to work with. None of this is secret information. It's all legal and available to anyone, but it requires capital to execute. You can't tax loss harvest if you don't have investments. You can't benefit from the mortgage interest deduction if you can't afford a down payment. You can't max out your 401k and your IRA and your HSA if you're barely scraping by. So the effective tax rate on wealth accumulation goes down as you get wealthier, which means your money compounds faster. It's another invisible advantage that kicks in after you've crossed certain thresholds. Here's something kind of weird that happens as you build wealth. Opportunities start appearing that weren't available before. Not because you're smarter or working harder, but just because you have capital to deploy. When you have $5,000 in savings, you can't really do much with it except keep it safe. But when you have $100,000, you can be an angel investor in a friend's startup. You can buy into a real estate syndication. You can take advantage of market crashes by buying stocks when everyone else is panicking. You can invest in yourself, take 6 months to switch careers, start a business, move to a new city for a better opportunity. Money creates optionality, and optionality creates more money. It's a feedback loop. I have a relative who bought rental properties in 2010, right after the housing crash. He didn't have some special insight into the market, he just had enough cash saved up to make down payments when property prices were low and credit was tight and most people couldn't get financing. Those properties have tripled in value. That's not genius, that's just having capital at the right time. The path to $100,000 doesn't offer many of these opportunities. You're mostly grinding, saving, doing the fundamental work. But the path from $100,000 to $500,000 is full of these accelerators if you're paying attention. There's this intangible thing that happens when you have some wealth accumulated. You start to feel like someone who's good with money. And that identity shift matters more than you think. When your net worth is $8,000 and you're 32 years old, it's hard not to feel like you're failing somehow, like you don't understand money, like you're bad at adulting. And that feeling creates this defensive psychology where you might avoid looking at your finances, avoid learning about investing, avoid thinking about money because it just makes you feel inadequate. But when you hit $50,000, then $75,000, then $100,000, something changes. You start to feel competent. You start reading about finance not out of desperation, but out of interest. You make better decisions because you feel like someone who makes good financial decisions. You project that confidence in negotiations, in career conversations, in how you carry yourself. This is totally irrational, by the way. Your net worth doesn't actually determine whether you're smart about money. But psychology is weird like that. Perception shapes reality. And this confidence compounds just like the money does. You make better career moves. You negotiate better. You spot opportunities. You take calculated risks, all because you feel like someone who has their shit together financially, even if you're still building. So here's where we end up after walking through all of this. The journey to $100,000 is structurally harder than the journey to $500,000 because everything is working against you at the start. Your income is probably low, your fixed costs are a huge percentage of that income, your compound interest is negligible, you're dealing with debt instead of building assets, you can't take risks, you can't access better opportunities, you're paying higher effective tax rates on your wealth accumulation, and you feel broke, which creates a psychology of scarcity rather than abundance. But once you get past that first milestone, and honestly, it might be $75,000 or $150,000 depending on your situation, the exact number matters less than the principle, everything inverts. Your income is probably higher, your fixed costs are a smaller percentage of your income, your compound interest becomes meaningful, you have access to better tax strategies, you can take advantage of opportunities, you feel confident, which leads to better decisions. The system is designed, whether intentionally or not, to be hardest when you have the least and easiest when you have the most. That's not fair. It's not just, but it is reality. And knowing this, understanding this, is weirdly liberating. Because it means if you're struggling to build that first chunk of wealth, you're not stupid, you're not undisciplined, you're not failing, you're just playing the game on hard mode, and the difficulty level changes dramatically once you level up. So what do you actually do with this information? A few things. First, give yourself some grace. If you're 28 or 32 or 37 and you don't have $100,000 saved, that doesn't mean you're behind or broken. It means you're in the hardest part of the journey, the part where it's all you and no help from compound interest or tax advantages or network effects. Second, focus on the things you can control. Increasing income is probably more impactful than cutting expenses when you're starting out. Every $10,000 raise is enormous when your base is low. Learn skills, switch jobs, negotiate, freelance on the side, whatever makes sense for your situation. Optimization can come later. Third, automate everything you can, because willpower is finite and you're already using a lot of it just to get through life. Set up automatic transfers to savings or investment accounts. Remove the decision from the equation. Fourth, be patient and trust the process. The beginning is slow, painfully slow, but it's not linear. You're not going to build wealth at the same pace for the next 30 years. It accelerates, sometimes dramatically. And finally, remember that the goal isn't really 100,000 or 500,000 or whatever number you're chasing. The goal is freedom, options, security, peace of mind, the ability to make decisions based on what you want rather than what you can afford. The numbers are just milestones on that path. The first milestone is the hardest one, but it's not impossible. You're not crazy for thinking it's hard. It is hard. It's supposed to be hard, but hard doesn't mean impossible. And every month you keep showing up, keep saving, keep learning, you're building momentum that will eventually carry you further than you can imagine right now. And that's worth remembering on the days when you check your account and feel like you're getting nowhere. You're climbing the steepest part of the mountain. The view doesn't look like much yet, but you're higher than you were yesterday, and tomorrow you'll be higher still. That's how this works. One step, then another, then eventually you look back and realize how far you've come.